Hey guys, welcome to the show. Today, I have a very unusual episode, but you'll understand why I'm talking about this when we get closer to the end. I was reading an article in the New York Times a couple weeks ago about the Menendez brothers. There's a new documentary about the whole story of the Menendez brothers and the trial. If you don't remember, Lyle and Eric Menendez were kids. They were 18 and I believe 22 when they shot their parents in their Beverly Hills mansion. Their parents are Jose and Kitty Menendez. And the trial, they were arrested in 1990, and then the trial began in 1993. By the way, if you have kids in the room, this is kind of mature content, so please, maybe don't let them watch this. But I wanted to watch the documentary because I wanted to see again, because I mean I was around during the trial. I had just moved to Los Angeles, and it was because I moved to LA in I think June of 1993. So it was very much the trial was very much, it was it was an international story, but it was very much kind of close to home. I actually lived in 1993 a mile away from their house in Beverly Hills. So I wanted to look back on it and remember what exactly happened, because I know that their defense was the idea that their father molested them pretty much for their entire lives. I mean, not Lyle, the older brother, was molested from the age of, I believe, 6 to 8 years old by his father. And then Eric Menendez was molested, I think, from 6 years old until they were killed, until they shot their parents, until he was 18 by his father. And the molestation was so insane. Their father was a very powerful man in Hollywood. He was the CEO of Hertz Rent-A-Car for a while, and then he became the head of RCA Records. He had a lot of businesses. He was very influential, very powerful, very, very aggressive and dominant from what, witnesses have testified about him. And so so I went back to look at their testimony, the kids' testimony, Lyle and Eric Menendez, to see how kind of it held up and just to remember it really. And I watched their testimonies and I was just absolutely blown away by the veracity of the testimonies. I mean, you can't, and I'm gonna show you these clips of their testimony about the abuse. And I'm sorry, but you cannot act this way. Like, you cannot act this. This is not acting. This is real. And I can tell because as you know, in my book, I talk about this. I was molested when I was 9 years old, and I'm not comparing my situation to theirs because thankfully my experience was only one time with a school friend's father. I spent the night at the house of my friend, and in the middle of the night, I woke up to his father molesting me, and it was the most terrifying night of my life. It still has ramifications and effects. It still impacts my life today. I still have, issues sleeping sometimes at night and other things, and it really does a number on you. When you're molested as a child, it does a major number on you. So the judge in this case was Stanley Weisberg, and he was the judge in the Rodney King case. And this is important because the four officers in that case were acquitted. And so Stanley Weisberg was determined to win the Menendez case because he was so humiliated by the loss in the Rodney King case. And so let me just give you kind of the characters in this story. Eric Menendez's lawyer was Leslie Abramson, and we'll see a picture of her here. And Lyle's lawyer was a former public defender named Jill Lansing, and the prosecutor was a woman named Pamela Bozanich. I think that's how you pronounce it. And the prosecutor is just unbelievable. Like, to this day, because in the documentary, the prosecutor is in the documentary, and to this day, she still doesn't believe the kids, which is bizarre. And she's so completely has zero sympathy for these kids who were violently molested their entire lives. It's bizarre to me that she's still hanging on to the bitterness of losing this case. But we'll get to that in a minute. What happened was, when Lyle, the older brother, was molested from 6 to 8 years old, like I said, and then I think it stopped because he threatened to tell on his father. So his father stopped, and then he started molesting the younger brother, Eric. And unbeknownst to Lyle had no idea. And the father was extremely harsh on these boys in other ways. Like, if they didn't make perfect grades, if they weren't excellent in, the number one in their sports, like tennis. Eric was a tennis player. The father would just have freak out on the kids and tell them that they were worthless, and was so he was the worst father you could possibly have. I mean, what father molests his own children and own boys? Like, it's just absolutely absurd. And so that was the defense in the trial. And so the trial begins in 1993. And again, this is after not only the Rodney King verdict, but also after the O.J. Simpson was acquitted right before, I think 5 or 6 months before this trial began. So the DA in Los Angeles wanted to, Gil Garcetti was his name. He wanted to absolutely get these convictions because he was humiliated by the OJ acquittal. And so he was just on a rampage to get these two kids convicted, no matter what. And so after the kids, so what the tipping point, the reason the kids murdered the parents was Eric was supposed to go to Brown University on the East Coast. And so that was he was living for that, to finally get away from his father molesting him. Like, that's all he could think about, was getting away from his father. And I think he also was maybe going to go to Stanford, or he was accepted to Stanford. But his dad, and at the end of the day, his dad said, no, you're going to UCLA, which UCLA is basically Beverly Hills. It's like right next to Beverly Hills. You're going to UCLA, and you can live in the dorm, but you're also living at home I think it was like 3 days a week, 3 nights a week. So Eric knew that the molestation was going to continue. And a lot of people say, well, why didn't they run away? Or why didn't they go to the police? Or what? When you're groomed like that for years and years and years, decades, you don't think that way. You don't, and also, if you go to the police back in that time in 1989, the police are not going to believe you. So and also his father was so powerful that the police would have been more afraid of the father than the sons. So that wasn't an option. And so what happened was, Eric, once he found out that he couldn't go away to college and had to stay home during college, he freaked out, went to his brother Lyle, and told Lyle everything, that his father had been molesting him as well. And Lyle was just super protective of Eric. They were so close. The two brothers were very, very close, because I think that both of them being kind of victims of this tyrannical father really bonded them. So they were very, very close. So Eric goes to Lyle and tells him this, and Lyle flips out and goes to confront the father. And so Lyle goes to the father, confronts him about it, and says, I know that uh, you're molesting Eric. And the father's response, Jose Menendez's response to Lyle was, quote, "You listen to me. What I do with my son is none of your business." So that's when both sons felt like their lives were in danger. That their lives were in imminent danger, because now that the cat was out of the bag, now that the father knew Lyle knew, they thought that they were going to be killed, because the father had made it very clear. He told Lyle and Eric at different times, he said, "If you tell anyone about this molestation, I will kill you." So the kids obviously knew, they felt like their father was going to kill them if word got out. And so once Lyle confronted his father, and the father freaked out, the kids went and bought guns. They ended up in San Diego buying 2 shotguns, 12 gauge shotguns. And oh, by the way, so one time when I think Eric was younger, he said when his father came into his bedroom to basically molest him, he said no. He only did this one time. He said no to his father, and his father stormed out of the room and came back with a knife. And he said, "I should kill you, and next time I will." So these kids are living in absolute terror. I mean, it's like they're like in, Guantanamo Bay, basically. They're growing up in Guantanamo Bay in Beverly Hills, living in terror every, day of their lives. And so that's when they go buy the guns in San Diego. They tried to buy them in LA, but there were some complications with that. So they ended up going to San Diego to buy these shotguns. And they came back. And on the night, August 20th, 1989, they walked into the living room of their home where their parents, Kitty and Jose Menendez, were on the sofas watching TV, and they shot them multiple times. I think Eric used all 12, what are they called, bullets in his shotgun, whatever that's called in a shotgun. He used all of the and shot. So the parents were shot multiple times and died. They both died. And initially, and I think Lyle, or I don't know if I think it was Lyle who made the phone call, the 911 phone call, and pretended that it was a mafia hit. And he was like crying on the 911 phone call. He said that, he was screaming and crying and saying, "My parents have been killed. They've been killed. Like someone killed them." And so the police show up, and they don't even think that the boys did it. They don't even consider them as suspects for a while. It wasn't until March of 1990. So from August 20th, 1989 to March 1990, the boys weren't even arrested. And then so during this time, from the murder until they were arrested, the boys were kind of like out of their minds. They went on this, spending spree. They bought a Porsche, they bought a Jeep, they bought several Rolexes. They went on this wild spending spree. I think they stayed at the penthouse at the Bel Air Hotel. So it looked pretty shady. It looked like, they killed their parents for the money. But you have to think about the state of mind that these kids were in. First of all, they were just completely out of their minds and distraught after, decades of sexual abuse from their father, and their mother was in cahoots. Their mother said when she was confronted by Lyle about the molestation, Kitty says, she said she knew everything. And she said, quote, "What do you think? I'm stupid?" So the mother knew the whole time that these two boys were being molested by her husband and did nothing about it, didn't intervene. And she was probably, terrified of him as well. But I mean, what mother does that? What mother doesn't, when you tell her that your father is molesting you, what mother doesn't do everything in her power to intervene? So the mother she was in cahoots with the father. I mean, she knew that this was going on. So as I said, after the murders, their behavior was crazy. They were spending, they were seen laughing at places. They were still living in the house. The boys were living in the house on Elm Drive in Beverly Hills after the murders. And Lyle said, I didn't have normal coping mechanisms from my childhood. I was comfortable keeping secrets. So, yeah, when you're told your entire childhood, when you're molested your entire childhood, and then you're told if you tell anyone, you're going to be killed, of course you're going to become a pathological liar. Like, because there's so much like secrets and lies in the family. And so he was used to that kind of pattern of behavior. And so the whole idea that they did it for the money was absurd, because they were the sole inheritors of the estate of Jose Menendez, which was worth at that time $14 million, which today would probably be, I don't know, $200 million. I don't know. And also, for some reason, Lyle, and this is just being brainwashed and groomed by the father, both sons, but especially Lyle, didn't want to talk about the sexual molestation because he didn't want to destroy his father's reputation. Both kids idolize it's this weird, twisted, dark thing, but both kids idolized the father, even though he was molesting them and basically torturing them their whole lives. They idolized him. So they did not want to talk about the molestation. It wasn't, and the defense lawyers they couldn't figure out why the kids did it until I believe it was Eric who was sent to a psychiatrist named Dr. Vickery, and Dr. Vickery finally got it out of Eric that all the stories about the molestation. And so Dr. Vickery told Leslie Abramson what was going on, and so that became the defense in the trial, that the kids were sexually abused their entire lives and threatened their entire lives. And it was a very, very strong defense. So at that point, the boys, they admitted that they killed their parents. And so the options for the juries were, because there were two juries, so each boy had his own attorney, Leslie Abramson and Jill Lansing, and they had two juries, but they were tried at the same time in the same courtroom. So there were two juries in the courtroom in the first trial. There were two trials, but this was in the first trial. There were two options for the jury. Either it was manslaughter or first-degree murder. I believe those are the only two options. Let's just look at the clips now. I want you to see their testimony on the stand. So first, let's look at clip number 1, where Lyle is testifying about being molested from the age of 6 to 8 years old. Let's look at that now, and you'll see, I think you'll see, I certainly did, that there is absolutely no way he can manufacture these emotions. Let's look at this now.
And between the ages of 6 and 8, Did your father have sexual contact with you?
Yes.
And how did it start?
Just started with, after sports practices, he would massage me, and we would have these talks, and he would show me, and he would fondle me, and he would ask me to do the same with him, and I would touch him, and we would undress.
Where would this
and it
take
was
place?
in my bedroom.
And how often would this happen?
Like 2 or 3 times a week.
And for how long did this happen?
Not too long. It began to change.
When did it begin to change?
I'm not sure exactly at what time, but almost close to when I was 7.
And how did it change?
Just became more involved.
What do you mean more involved?
We would be in the bathroom, and he would put me on my knees, and he would guide me, all my movements, and I would have oral sex with him.
Did you want to do this? At some point, did he do some other things to you?
Yes.
What else did he do to you?
He used objects,
What kind of objects?
a toothbrush, and some sort of shaving utensil brush.
And what would he do with the toothbrush?
Well, in the bedroom, we'd have what we called object sessions, and just slide my pants down or take my pants off. Sometimes it would be for a short period of time, sometimes longer. Just lay me on the bed, and he'd have a tube of Vaseline, and he just played with me.
And was there some point in time when he decided to use something besides the toothbrush?
Yes.
And did he try to anally penetrate you with something else?
He did.
And what was it?
He raped me.
Did you cry?
Yes.
Did you bleed?
Yes.
Were you scared?
Very.
Did you ask him not to?
Yes.
How did you ask him not to?
I just told him, I don't. I'm sorry. I just told him that I didn't want to do this, and that it hurt me. And he said that he didn't mean to hurt me. And he loved me.
Was that important to you, that he loved you?
Yes, very. But I still didn't want to do it.
Did you tell your mom?
Yes.
What did you say to your mom?
I told her to tell Dad to leave me alone. And he keeps touching me.
What did your mom say?
She told me to stop it. And that I was exaggerating. And that my dad has to punish me when I do things wrong. And she told me that he loved me.
Wow. That's hard to watch. It's very difficult to watch that. You can see in Lyle's when he's testifying that it is absolutely crushing him to do this. So let's look at Eric's testimony now.
What do you believe was the originating cause of you and your brother ultimately winding up shooting your parents?
Me telling.
You telling what?
Me telling Lyle that,
You telling Lyle what? Was it you telling Lyle about something that was happening?
my dad.
Okay.
My dad.
Your Honor, can I ask a leading question?
If you don't ask.
My dad.
Wait 1 second, Mr. Menendez. Okay, let me ask.
No, he was in the process of answering, so there's no need to ask him.
Can you answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, it was you telling Lyle what?
My dad had been molesting me.
And did you want something from your brother? Is that why you told him?
I wanted it to stop.
Were you seeking help from your brother?
Yes.
Mr. Menendez, during the summer of 1989, were you being sexually molested by your father?
Yes.
And when did that begin? How old were you?
I was 6 years old.
How long, from the time you were 6 when you say your father started to molest you, how long did that go on?
12 years.
And were there episodes of sexual activity with your father over that last summer?
Yes.
Over the course of the 12 years, did the type of sexual activity that your father engaged in with you vary and change?
Yes.
Were there patterns to the behavior so that there were actually different kinds of sexual incidents with your father?
Overall.
Yes.
And did you come over the years to give those different kinds of sexual incidents names?
Yes.
And would you tell us what were the names that you gave to those different types of incidents?
Knees.
Knees?
Knees.
K-N-E-E-S?
Yes.
That was one type?
Yes.
What was another type?
Nice sex. Nice sex.
Nice sex. What was another kind?
Rough sex.
Rough sex. And was there another kind still?
Yes.
And what name did you come to give that kind?
Just sex.
You called that sex.
Yes.
And was that you called sex some form of intercourse?
Yes.
When, before your father died, was the last incident of what you called sex?
In May
Of what year?
1989.
And when, before your father died, was the last incident of knees?
In August
Of what year?
1989.
And that last incident of knees took place in what location?
My bedroom.
The bedroom that Detective Zoller was just identifying photographs of?
Yes.
Over the course of those 12 years between age 6 and age 18, where did most of the sexual incidents with your father take place?
In my bedroom.
Starting at which house?
In Muncie.
And did episodes of sexual activity between yourself and your father also take place in the next house you lived in on Mill Road?
Yes.
And did similar incidents occur when you lived in the house in Pennington on Lakeshore Drive?
Yes.
And were there incidents in the fancy house on Mountain Avenue in Princeton?
Yes.
And were there incidents in the rented house in Calabasas?
Yes.
And were there incidents in the big mansion in Beverly Hills?
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, Eric got it much worse than Lyle, because Eric, as he said, he was molested for 12 years. And Lyle was molested for, I think, 3 years, from age 6 to 8. So Eric really got the worst of it. And so yeah, I mean, you can't look at that testimony and think he's acting. No actor can do that that well. Like, that is crazy. And it also just, when you've had that shame and that guilt and that all of that trauma built up in your life for your entire life, that's what happens when you finally tell it, when you finally tell people about it. And at the end of the trial, the verdict came back, and it was, both juries were hung juries. And I think all of the women in the juries wanted to vote for manslaughter, and all the men wanted to vote for first-degree murder, because the men didn't believe that boys could be molested by their father. And so it was both juries were hung. And the Judge Weisberg declared it a mistrial. And so then there was a second trial. And this time, again, the DA in Los Angeles was so determined to get these guys convicted, and the judge was so humiliated by the hung juries that he didn't allow he didn't allow almost all of the witnesses. There were, in their first trial, there were 51 witnesses for the boys, basically corroborating that there was sexual abuse and that the father was abusive and all this stuff. Like, very, very damning evidence from these witnesses. And in the second trial, the judge decided not to permit the abuse defense to come into the trial, which is, it's absolutely a miscarriage of justice to do that. He did not allow the entire reason why these boys killed their parents, he didn't allow that evidence in the trial because he was so determined to get these convictions that he didn't care about the truth. And so they were tried again, didn't have the 51 witnesses corroborating all of these kind of horrific stories about Jose Menendez, their father, didn't have the cousin who corroborated. Their cousin, Diane, in the first trial said that Jose put Lyle on the kitchen counter and prompted him to jump off and catch him, but he backed off and told him so when he was 2 years, I think he was, yeah, no, I don't know how old he was, but he put Lyle on the kitchen counter, prompted him to jump off, and that the father would catch him. And once Lyle jumped off the counter, the father backed off and let the child fall. And he said, and Jose Menendez said, this is to teach you basically never to trust anyone. And in 1976, the cousin, Diane, who was I think she was about the same age as the boys, Lyle told her of the molestation that was going on. And she told Kitty, the mother, she told Lyle and Eric's mother, Kitty, about the molestation. So she was one of the main, key witnesses in the first trial, this cousin, Diane. And she was not allowed to give her testimony in the second trial, which is insane. And one of their aunts testified that Eric, when he was 2 years old, he would have to hold on to a bar without crying. He would have to hang from a bar. This is a 2-year-old toddler. And Jose Menendez would make him hold on to a bar, and he wasn't allowed to cry. And he would have to hold on to it as long as possible. And when he would cry, Jose Menendez would scream at him and to basically tell him that he was, a failure. So yes, that is. So after the second trial, they were both convicted of murder, and they were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And they have been in prison for, I believe it's 35 years now. So think about this. The first basically 20 years of their lives, 20 odd years of their lives, they were more or less in prison in their home in Beverly Hills by their tyrannical father and their just evil mother. They were in prison in their home growing up, and they've been in prison for 35 years now. So they basically they've never really felt freedom in their lives. Lyle went to Princeton after high school. He went to Princeton for a year or two before the murders. And so he had a little bit of freedom after college, after high school, but Eric never experienced that freedom. And now they're both in prison for life. And what's interesting is a lot of, and then also this is another, so all these things have come out now about this. And one of the Menudo brothers, his name is Roy Rossellio. He was in the popular boy band Menudo, which was very big, I think, in the late 80s, I believe. And Jose Menendez was the head of the record company. And Roy Rossellio just recently came out and claimed that he was abused by Jose Menendez when he was 14. And his claims were strikingly similar to the claims of both Lyle and Eric Menendez, the claims they made about their father's abuse. So that was a big, big turning point in their case. So now the DA in Los Angeles, George Gascon, has come out and said, we're going to look into this case again and basically, see if they should be released. And also, this is crazy too. Rosie O'Donnell and Kim Kardashian both have been in contact with the boys, and they believe the boys' story. They believe the boys should be let out of prison. I do as well. I think it's a travesty that they've been in prison for 35 years, for what they did, for basically self-defense, for defending themselves against their abusive, tyrannical, threateningly murderous father and mother. So I think they should be let out ASAP. If it were up to me, I would go to wherever they are, whatever prison they're in now, and get them out immediately. I would drive there now. And I want to bring this back to what happened to me when I was 9 years old and end with this, because when that happened, when I was molested, I was terrified of telling my father and my mother or anyone. I ended up telling my brother, who was closest in age to me, and a mutual friend who was kind of like a family friend. He was our age as well. So I told them about it, but I never wanted my parents to find out about it because of the shame of it all and the stigma. And so I think I've talked about this before, but after I became a Christian, I was at lunch with my father, and I because he had known my brother, who when I told my brother when I was a kid about it, he later told my entire family basically what had happened. And so my father and my parents knew that I was molested at a certain point. And so I wanted to explain to my father exactly what happened and explain to him why I didn't tell him at the time. And so we had lunch, and I told him the graphic details of exactly what happened. And at the end of it, I said, Dad, if I had come to you when I was 9 years old and told you this, that Mr. So-and-so molested me, what would you have done? He said, and my dad was a lawyer. And my dad said, I would have given him two choices. And I'm like, what do you mean? He said, either turn himself in or ... And I knew what that meant. He meant he would have someone kill him, which I think it's not a biblical response necessarily, but I mean, by the way, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, in Leviticus, incest was a capital crime. It was punishable by death. Now, it wasn't in Leviticus. It doesn't mention a father and son. It's different, but it does talk about incest, and the consequence of that is death. So God has a very strong opinion about sexual, about incest and about sexual abuse. And so my dad, and I told my dad, I said, Dad, that's why I didn't tell you, because I didn't want you to end up in prison for getting this guy murdered. And then I would have felt responsible for this family basically losing a father and not having a breadwinner in the family. And so that's one of the reasons I didn't tell him. The other reason is it was just too embarrassing and too shameful to tell him. And so again, child molestation, when you're molested as a child, it does, as I said, it does a number on you, and it's awful. And so my final word on this is just these kids, they're not kids, they're 55, they're 55 and 52 now, I think, around that age. And they're still in prison, and they need to be set free. Thank you for watching.